Now it's 3:15, okay. Welcome to Fast macOS Management with Chef. I am Nate Walck, and I work on the client platform engineering team at Uber. And you may have heard from my coworker Danielle earlier today. She talked about our end-to-end provisioning stack and how that all looks. So today I'm going to talk about Chef, of course, and we're going to go over what constitutes a cookbook, attributes, API cookbooks, and generally how you interact with them, as well as I'm going to give you a zip file and allow you to do some stuff on your machine if you feel adventurous. I promise I didn't pick anything too dangerous, but it should be fun. So Chef is a powerful automation platform that transforms complex infrastructure into code, bringing your servers and services to life. This is kind of the story of every config management tool that was ever made. And then in our community, we tend to do stuff like this, just change the terms and do whatever we want with it, just to make sure that it gets our work done. And a lot of vendor products provide ways of managing client machines, but in a lot of ways, you're limited to what they provide, and then feature requests, and then waiting for feedbacks to get read. Maybe that was too specific. And so on. So the nice thing about Chef is it's very flexible. It's all Ruby. You can write basically whatever you need or whatever you want in that moment. So what are cookbooks exactly? The Chef ecosystem is rather large. There's a whole bunch of pieces to it. Today we're going to laser focus on only two of them. It's going to be recipes and cookbooks. Recipes live inside of cookbooks, and they are the what do things, but we'll get to that later. And basically, cookbooks are composed of attributes, and attributes are they're structured data. So in Ruby, it's a hash. It's the same as like a dictionary in Python or any other language, and they can contain multiple different types of data. So here's an example. If you have a cookbook called CPE example, you would have an attributes folder within there, and there would be a file called default.rb. So what default.rb is, it's the default attributes for this cookbook. So if you read it left to right, it's right to left, if you invert it, it's the default attributes for the CPE example cookbook. Inside of there, you can find code that looks like this. I'll go through some attributes more in depth a little bit later. But this is kind of what they look like. You'll see a lot of things that look just like this if you ever look at a Chef cookbook and dig into the attributes. They're more than likely more complicated than this just because people love their data structures. Recipes are the part of the cookbook that define which actions take place during a Chef run. This is a little bit of a simplified definition, but generally you will look at a recipe and this is where you will actually tell the machine what you want to happen. Much like attributes, right to left, you have a default recipe for CP example. In recipes, you can manipulate attributes, which is the one that we just looked at. So you can change, say, CP example screensaver, enable screensaver to true. Or you can also manage something like a launch statement. So this is actually completely just copy-pasted from Facebook's GitHub. Thank you, Mike Dodge. But this will create a launch D called callmom weekly that runs a script called callmom, and the calendar interval is, basically every 7th day of the week at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it'll only try to run for 300 seconds before it times out. So, that bash script could call or yo or something like that, give you a notification, remind you, whatever. But it would take that and then actually make the launch D on disk. Another type of resource you can use in recipes, just as an example, is a file. So here we have a policy banner text file. So it's what pops up at the login window. And the content of it is welcome to PSU Mac admins. So in the content line there, we're actually feeding it a string. So everything between these two quotes are a string. And that's exactly what you would see in the file when it gets laid down. So when it comes to files as well, right to left, exact same thing. You have a default directory where Chef looks for files that you want to use, and it lives in the CP example cookbook. And then to use these files, it's very similar to file. If we go back to file, actually, in this one, if you notice, it's just file, and we're actually giving it the contents right there. So it's all in that 3 lines. That's everything you need to know to lay down that file. But if you move over here, you have cookbook file. And we're doing something a little bit different here. You see it's prepended by cookbook file. And it's telling it we want to put this file on disk in this location and with that name. Now, when you use cookbook file, it looks where you might expect in the default directory for files, and it looks for a file called policy banner. And it'll grab that file and place it on disk where you told it to. Actually, that's an old comment. So we'll go into here, and we will make a new directory. So the old file was in files/default, so we'll make a new directory. So we'll have files/default. Disregard MOTD. That was an editing error. And we will move the message, it's actually policy banner, over into messages. And then when we source it, you can specify the folder name there. So by default, it knows to look here. And then it also looks in files/default/messages, and then for the file. So in the previous example, policy banner was just chilling in the default folder, but now it's in default/messages, and then policy banner. So it lets you organize things. So otherwise, you might have like a cookbook that has a bazillion files all sitting in one folder, and that's no fun. It gets really messy really quick. Templates are another special type of file, and they live in template/default. You might detect a pattern here. But basically, we have to, with templates, what it is it's a file that has dynamic data inside of it. So you can pass variables into the template and then use those to write out the file. So we'll use an example here. So I have my name here. I'm setting it equal to name equals Nate. Nate is a string. And then this time when we place the file, instead of saying file or cookbook file, we're saying template. And it's the same path, so that's all the same. And the source is very similar, but the difference is instead of .txt, it's actually .erb, which is the Ruby templating format. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to take a variable, which we're now passing in here, and don't worry about like these here and all that other stuff, but all we're saying is this variable is being passed in here. And inside of the template, it'll have the same thing, name. So basically, I just made these the same so that you don't have to keep 2 different variable names in your head. But the variable we're passing in is name, and it's equal to the string Nate. And when we look at it, this is what the actual template file looks like. It's policybanner.txt.erb, and it's the same message we had before, but this one's actually personalized because we know who the machine is, whose machine this is. So it's still a string inside of the file, and then we have this funky thing, which is it's a ERB format and allows you to say, replace everything in this with the value of this variable here. So the variable is name. So whatever is in the name variable, which is the string Nate, my name, replace everything from the bracket to the bracket with that. And basically, it'll take that. It says, OK, I'm going to write out. The grade's a little bit hard to see, but it'll write out this string, and then for this, it has to be interpreted. So it'll take a look at that, and as I said, take the variable, and instead of name, it'll replace it with Nate. So it'll render to this. So when you lay down this file, it looks just like this after it gets fully laid down, because it took the string and put it into the file instead of just being static. And just a little bit easier, everything from the 2 brackets, the greater than and less thans, everything between there gets replaced. And that's where the magic happens. It goes from that straight over to that, and anything you have in there will just be plopped right down. So you could have like a really long string, and it would just plop it down there. Anything you want. Also in cookbooks, we have libraries, and they can be named whatever. They don't have to be named default. They don't have to be named anything special. If it's in the library's directory, Chef will pick it up. Even if you include the cookbook in a run, it will make that library available, even if you don't specifically include the cookbook. So the functions will be available, but it won't actually run them until you call them. Custom resources, this is a little bit more advanced, and we won't get too deep into this. But it's also whatever, but it's in resources. So you have the name of your resource in the resources folder in cookbook CP example. And for these, they're also made available, but these you do have to include. And another important part of cookbooks is metadata. And metadata is probably the most important part because it tells chef what other cookbooks this cookbook needs to work. And then it also tells it lovely information like who do you yell at when it breaks, and a description of it and the version number. And for this cookbook here, you can see it depends on a cookbook called CPU Utils, which comes from Facebook's GitHub and is a common requirement in the Facebook, Uber, and Pinterest chef repos. But this tells chef everything it needs to know about the cookbook, what the name of it is, all that information. And this lives in the root of the cookbook. So it's just cookbook/metadata.rb. And if this file is missing, chef will just puke. It'll just stack trace and you're done. There's nothing else it won't even continue. So it'll look through and see if it has the cookbook, see the cookbook, not find the metadata, and it will not be happy. So let's move on to attributes specifically. I said we would come back to this because this is a key part of how API cookbooks work. So attributes live in default attributes under the CP example cookbook. And in this particular case, we have key and value. And the thing on the left is a hash, and we're setting it equal to a value. So we're setting this key equal to that value, which in this case is a string, but could be a bool, could be an int, could be many different data types, whatever's appropriate for this specific cookbook. Node here is complicated, but node is technically a hash object, but it's like a special chefy hash object. And the way you refer to the hashes in Ruby is just exactly the same way. It's square brackets, and then in quotes the string name of the key, and of course the value. And that's just like a basic hash, setting a hash. So let's look at the API cookbooks. This is a little bit more applicable and makes a little bit more sense. So here we're setting a timeout for some arbitrary thing. And you'll notice this is actually in recipes, not in attributes. So the API cookbooks, you never modify them in attributes, you always modify them in recipes. And that's how they're made to be consumed. And if you try to do it in attributes, you will get undefined behavior. Just like MCX. It's great. So in this case, we're not setting just node, we're doing node.default. This is also a chefism. It's chef has multiple levels of their hashes and then does this auto merge thing, but it's really hard to track and really hard to keep your head around. So we use default for everything. And that's just kind of how we make the API cookbooks. We make them with node.default in mind. And although it looks a little bit different, it functions exactly the same as in the previous example. So for this one, we have the cookbook CP example, and we are setting an attribute of timeout for that to 30 seconds. And that is an int, so it's like a regular number, not actually a string. So here's an example. This is an API cookbook we open sourced back in April for managing SSH. Basically, the first thing you have to do for all of Uber's cookbooks, and I believe most of Pinterest's cookbooks, if not all of them, the first thing you have to do is enable the cookbook, because we include them by default, but we don't like making opinionated decisions about what to do. So the worst thing in the entire world is you include a cookbook and it just stomps on your system. I absolutely hate that, and it's just a really bad user experience. Can we do? Let's go ahead. Good question. So API cookbooks, you never touch the actual resources for. API cookbooks you only consume in recipes. So you're setting data like this, and that's it. So you set this data, and then example does the thing. You don't have to care how it does the thing, and it could do the thing on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and you don't have any clue how it does it. So long as you set the setting to the value, it handles it all. So the difference is if you're writing like a regular chef cookbook, it would be like that launch D example. You have to know the resource, all the arguments, and all the options that you can pass it. This, you don't need to know the options. You can look in the README, normally copy paste. I'm lazy, so I make good README so I don't ever have to think about it again. And then you just tweak the settings to whatever you want it, and it does the work. So with SSH, I'll show you exactly how that works.
Would it be fair to say, Nate, that what Uber and Facebook are doing in developing API cookbooks is kind of unique in the chef world?
It is, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's easier to dive into because you don't need to understand the system's internals and how everything works. And it's nice because you can just go yell at Facebook because they're now your support, like this guy here.
When I started in
Yeah.
Chef, it's like, "Ugh," and then I saw what you guys are doing. It's like, oh, okay. But if you're trying to learn Chef on your own,
Absolutely.
you have no clue what this is.
Yes.
That's why this is important.
Exactly, and I'm trying to go through this quickly so we can. I have a zip file for you all, so we can have fun, and it'll be great. We're not going to manage SSH because that's kind of boring. So for this one, we're setting SSH to true, and we're giving it a config. So you have a host name here, which is just creatively, it's my host. And you're setting forward agent option to yes, hostname to mycompany.hostname.com. And what this does is it actually writes out the SSH file on disk, which on macOS, it's etc ssh_config. We're actually writing out to a special one, but that's an implementation detail. You don't need to care about it. All you know is if you set this, you will have this config written on disk, and your host will have the agent forward set, and your host name will be set. So a really good example of this would be you could set GitHub here and have your GitHub config and make sure that it's forwarding the correct key to GitHub if you're doing some stuff there. Come again? Not this one, because I'm morally opposed. I don't like that. But I try to avoid that. Actually, I lied a little bit, but we can get to that later. So let's color code this a little bit. So we're taking this here, and while it's structured data, the strings you are giving it are what's going to be laid down on disk. So we have my host in this little bit darker blue here, and that's the host name. And we have forward agent here in red, and that's one option. And then the second option is this lovely magenta, all default colors here on the top of the row. So host name and myhost.company.com. And then when it renders this to disk, it's exactly the same thing. I know that this my host is the host, the label for the SSH config. So I helpfully put this in here. You don't need to know about that. It just works. It knows to put host and then host name, and then it writes out the options for you. So basically, you take it from this and go to that, and upon chef run, it just spits out this file on disk. And back to the original non-color coded. It's a little bit overwhelming to look at, especially if they're really complicated. Some things have like a lot of logic in here, but I'm gonna try to avoid that a bunch because it makes it harder to read. I think it's a little bit easier to go from okay, so it's this. We don't care about that stuff. It's irrelevant. It spits out this on disk. It's a little bit easier to follow, hopefully. But once we start doing it, I think it'll be a little bit more clear. So this is where it gets scary, or fun, or scary. So that's fine. You can take your salt somewhere else. Okay. Sweet. So if you grab that from there, you can do that. If someone wants me to airdrop it to them, I can airdrop it to them if the internet is being a little bit cranky. But let's get this far, and then once we're this far, we will start having some fun. We are going to install Chef, so full disclosure, we're installing Chef on your machine, we're installing a basic configuration, and we will manage things like host name, but that's easy to change back, so it's not going to take a whole lot of effort. And then we're going to just dump it in user shared and extract it. I'm going to do these things as well. Actually, no. Sorry about that. Cool. So I'm going to leave that there. Oh, man. I don't know if I can move this over or not. But is it still legible-ish? Okay. So just move that off to the side there so I can do some stuff on the right-hand side here. So, actually, quit out of that. Yes, it has to be in user shared. Only because I made some assumptions. I didn't know where you like to keep your code. I put mine in /code, but I didn't want to force that on everyone, so I put it somewhere generic. No. This is where it goes really well. Let's see. Did I do uppercase or lowercase, chef? There we go, sweet. So Dropbox is a little bit funky, but you have to do like download and then direct download, which is really annoying. So we'll do that. And then we're gonna pop over to downloads. Sweet. So this may be some other things in here, but disregard. So I have the chef zip. It actually went pretty quick. So I'm just going to drop that right in user shared, double click it to extract. And inside I will find the, helpfully, the latest 14 release. And we'll get that going. I don't want to talk about that. But yeah, if you're going to start out or mess with this, try Chef 14 for now. Chef 15 is still in a state of flux, let's put it that way. But not in a bad way. The community is working with Chef to, they're actually open sourcing every part of Chef, whereas before they used to have some parts that were proprietary and some parts that weren't. But it might make it a little bit more difficult to use until they smooth over all that. I know we're sticking to Chef 14 for now, and we'll move over to 15 as soon as that's ready. All right, so Chef is installed. Let me get my sweet terminal windows over here. Sweet. Does anybody need this screen anymore? If not, I will move on. This is one last command you'll want to record. Right there. So this is the command we're going to use to run Chef. So this depends upon how much you trust me. I am asking you to run sudo on some code that you've just downloaded from the internet, from a sketchy-looking GitHub link, which I downloaded in incognito mode. That's nothing to say about the sketchiness, but disclaimer. So that's the command. If you need that again, I can always pop back to that. No problem. Come again? Oh, sorry. All right, so because I'm a good engineer, I always have a root window open that I never have to type my password again. So what we're gonna do here is, I am in user shared, so I'm gonna go into Chef. Oh yeah, thank you. No, fine, okay, whatever. Make this ginormous, thank you, Wes. So we're in Chef. I'm gonna open up Visual Studio Code. So you can come back to my main window. And we're gonna take a look at what we got in here. So in here we have client RB, run list, and we have some cookbooks. But let's start with client RB just for now. This is like the most simple client RB that I know how to make. It's called Chef Solo. Basically, it looks for a path on disk for where your cookbooks live, and it looks for a run list, and that's all it needs. So it looks here for all the cookbooks and what you want to run, and it looks here to know which cookbook to run initially. And that'll make more sense if we look at run lists, so let's take a peek at that. This right here is run list. So this is telling it, run one recipe, run CP init. Now, this is where I get to be hand wavy. CP init just basically includes a bunch of Chef cookbooks, so we don't need to worry about those details for now. But the Chef cookbooks it includes are stuff like, if we go over here, preference panes, screensaver, spotlight, host name, things like that. And because they're API cookbooks and they're written in a non-opinionated way, they don't make any changes. Even though they're included, they'll run and they'll say, I have nothing to do, nothing's set, and it won't do anything. So what we'll start with this is, we'll go all the way down to PSU base, and we'll go to recipes, which is, like most of the work you'll do is based in recipes when you're working with API cookbooks. And we'll go to organization settings. And what this is we install profiles and launch daemons. And the question that we had was, who are they for? Like com.apple, or are they, what company is it for? So what we ended up doing was we made this standard where we have organization, and you set it equal to your company name. So this is going to be blah Inc. Actually, I'm not going to do a space because it is going to be used for the prefix. So no spaces unless you like it to break. So it's going to be see, if I do Uber, it'll literally uninstall everything on my machine. It'll be great. So I'm going to do a Pretend Co. So the name of the company is Pretend Co. And then every launch daemon and profile that run on this machine or get installed will use that prefix. So if we make a launch daemon, it'll be com.pretendco.chef. Whatever the name of your launch daemon is. So if you make one for Call My Mom Weekly, it would be com.pretendco.chef.callmymomweekly. It's whatever, it's just appended to the end. It's all namespaced like that. And we have the .chef on here so that you know just by a glance that Chef owns that launch daemon. If you delete it, it'll put it back. If you change it, it will put it back. If you unload it, it will load it. If you delete it, it will put it back. So you can't get away from it. It's meant to track which ones Chef owns and which ones Chef does not own. So if we have that information in there and everything's happy, we will save that, and I will prove to you that it doesn't do anything, and I hope works as expected. Let's see. There we go. So that's the command. Yay. So it scrolled a bunch of things, but it didn't actually change anything. If you look at this, it says up to date behind the things. So here is host name. Well, it's up to date because we're not managing it. We are not forcing a host name. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, there. Sorry about that. All right. Should I make that bigger yet? I'll do that. I mean, everybody loves 80 wide columns anyways. Sorry, you got it? Cool, sweet. So well, let's just go through the run here real quick. So it starts Chef. The first thing it does is it looks at CP_init, and CP_init tells it, I need all these other cookbooks. And then it makes a list and says, here's a cookbook, does it exist? And it looks for hostname, and it looks into the cookbooks directory. If CP hostname does not exist in the directory, and you depend upon it, Chef will fail. So it looks at every cookbook, makes sure it's present on disk, makes sure it matches the metadata, because in the metadata we had like depends. So CP_init would depend a CP hostname. If it's missing, it wouldn't run. It more or less prevents you from like cutting yourself too much or hurting yourself too much. So all these are loaded and synced locally and put into a cache directory. And lastly, we have PSU base, which is the one that we just modified. So there's 14 resources, and it says, and then it checks them all and says, hey, do I have anything to do? And right here, CP hostname says configure hostname, and says up to date. So that means it has nothing to do. Same thing with hosts, paths D, if you want to set like a default path for things. Preference panes, if you want to manage any of the preference panes. All these things, we've not configured anything, it doesn't do anything. And at the very bottom, it says 0 out of 15 resources updated, meaning there's 15 resources defined technically, but they're not actually configured, so it doesn't do anything. There's nothing to actually update, it's in the state it expects it to be in. So we'll go back to code, and this is where we're gonna have some fun. We'll go back to recipes default, and you'll notice on line 15 there, we have this commented out line. And we're gonna do some exploration here on how Chef works. So I'm including a recipe called PSU base. It's PSU base : host name. If you look up here, this is PSU base : organization settings. And what we can kind of derive from that is, if you look over here, we have organization settings and it has a .rb, but including the recipe, it doesn't have the RB. So to include organization settings, you give it the cookbook name, which is PSU base, and you do it 2 colons, which is how Ruby namespaces things, and you also give it the name of the recipe you want to include. So this is an important point. Default is always run every time. So if you include the PSU base cookbook, which we are, it will always look to default.rb and do whatever it says in there. And what we're saying is include this other cookbook. We're not actually doing anything, we're just including another cookbook. And in organization settings, we're setting like your company name and things like that. And now we want to do a new one called PSU base host name. So will this work as is, do you think?
No.
Thank you. Why not?
Because it's not in that directory. directory structure?
Thank you. Yes, correct. Man.
I was like, if that works.
And I thought you were only Python. Yeah, you got it. So we have hostname here, and it doesn't exist over here, but we have organization settings here, and that does exist over here. So we're going to do what I always do. I'm just going to run Chef anyways, because I just try to make Chef happy. That's my whole life. Oh no, it didn't work. Okay. And then right here, it even tells you, it says, all right, let's look at the actual error. It says compile error, could not find recipe hostname, which is the name of the recipe. That's a little bit confusing in this context, for cookbook PSU base. So all this is saying is, we couldn't find a recipe called hostname in the cookbook PSU base. So down here, it actually shows you the file, which is CPU base, PSU base rather, recipes default, and it shows you the line. See these double little greater signs there? It says, this is the line, that's the problem, this is what caused the error. So it knows that it's trying to include this and failed to do so. So we're going to go do what Wes said. We're going to go over to recipes, new file, and we're going to make a new one called hostname.rb, because it is a Ruby file. And I am super lazy, so you'll see I am copying and pasting from here over to here, because I don't like to have to retype things. Oh no. There we go. I'm just going to take that, put it in hostname. You don't have to do this. This is just kind of like for humans, so they know what cookbook they're in. And this is the hostname recipe. So this is kind of like a standard. I don't know where it came from exactly, but it has the name of the cookbook, the name of the recipe. So if you like copy this somewhere else by accident, you know where it came from. Or if you copied it somewhere else intentionally and forgot to change it, you'll just be confused about where it came from. But yeah, so this is just telling you it's a cookbook called PSU base. It's a recipe called hostname. Now, what we'd like to do here is set the hostname for the machine. We want to manage that in some standard way. So I have no idea how to do that because I don't keep that type of stuff in my head. I am super lazy. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go over to the actual repo, because if you like reading Markdown, I'll just make this side note. If you like reading Markdown, in every cookbook, there's a readme.md. It tells you how to use it. It says, here are the attributes. Here's some examples of how to use it, et cetera, et cetera. But I much prefer this view. It's a little bit nicer. So I will go to CP hostname and readme, if I can alphabet, and much nicer, I think anyways. So right here, all it's telling you is the only things this cookbook expects are enforce and hostname. And I'm too lazy to use this, so I'm going to copy and paste this, because that's an example of how to do it, and I don't want to retype it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come back over here to hostname, having copied that. And right here, this is a little bit more complicated. I don't really want to mess with that. So we will do this. All right, so if you basically copy that out of the README, you can then just paste it in there. Everything's happy. It only supports macOS at the moment, so if you're not on macOS, I'm sorry. And enforce true means use this cookbook to set the host name to the thing we've configured. And if it's different, set it back. And then you also have to specify what you actually want the host name to be. So we're going to do a host name here as a string. So just delete everything to the right of the equals, and then do a single quote, and then I'm going to do this manually. I'm going to say PSU 2018 or 2019, what year is it? And what this will do then is, it will set my host name to this, but only if enforce is true. So it's important you have the enforce true. In fact, I can show you that because this is probably one of the more confusing bits. I'm going to delete that line. I just want to set the host name, because that's all I care about. I'm just setting the host name. And if I run chef now, it might not do what you expect. It would just do nothing, essentially, just like we had before. So 0 resources updated, and there's no green here. It normally shows you changes in green. So if I go back here and put that line back, so enforce is true, now I have enforce true, which enables the cookbook, and then I have a setting that tells it what to set it to. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And this is where the fun happens. Boom, right here. So Of course, macOS has 3 host names because we like to be thorough. And it's setting all 3 of them to the thing I told it to set it to. So I have N8-PSU 2019 for all 3 of them: computer name, host name, local host name. And you see this is in green, and it says action run, and it does not say up to date behind it because it was not up to date. The host name was not correct. It did not match what we had in config. So now if I run it again and we look at it, it will show up to date. All right, so now, see how it's not green? And instead of that little dash, it has a star there. And it says, execute setting hostname to this, action run. It says skipped due to only if. So it'll either say up to date, or it'll say skipped. This is actually something that'll probably fix later, but don't worry about that. It's an implementation detail. It does what you expect it to. So that's great. So we're now setting the host name. I will do host name. I'll do su-get local host name, because you test all your changes, right? Of course. And then computer name. So all 3, Chef is not lying to me. It set them to what I asked it to. It's all there. Now, that's managing host name. That's a pretty simple. Yes? Good.
If you change one of them,
Yes. Can't.
will it
Oh.
set all 3 again?
Nope, only the one that's different, I believe. That's a good question. Let's do it. Set hostname West-PSU 2019. All right.
I got your machine now.
You do. It's legally yours. You own it. It's legally yours now. That was like a contract. All right. So to answer your question, only one. Only the one that was changed. It knows its owner, not you. What's up? Yes. Absolutely. So this is where it gets a little bit nutty, and I was trying to avoid it, but let's go all the way back to the original example. All right, cool. So right here, this is called a node function, and I don't feel like explaining it, so I won't, but I'll tell you, node.consoleuser gets the console user. So whoever's logged into the machine at that moment, node.consoleuser gives you a string representation of that. So for me, it's N8. It'll give you that, and I can actually show you that. This is also serial number, so I don't love this naming scheme, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm just going to do PSU 2019, but I'm using node.consoleuser. So this is actually a function. And it could be a function, it could be a variable, you could have like an API call that reaches out and gets information and then grabs some of it and uses that to name the server, the machine, whatever you want. So,
I think this has always been my issue with Chef.
yes.
People talk about, oh yeah, all you need is node, you call node console, node.
Yep, I don't love it, but yeah.
Where in the hell does this information come from? Do I just feed it into your head, what you have to do, with Ruby?
Yes.
How is this all, where do you get this info?
The answer is yes, no.
Video?
That's right, I forgot the box, I'm sorry, that's my fault. All right, so I think we can blame Facebook for this one because it's in their repo.
Do you reverse engineer this stuff?
No, not really. So a lot of this stuff is, it's like, if you have a command to get console user, we just shove it in Node and give it a name so that it's easy to run. That's really what's happening on the background. So I can show you this one specifically, because that's a very good question. The question is, node functions, where do they come from?
Where does everything come from?
It comes from the documentation as far as I can tell. No, I actually end up reading a lot of the core code just because I have that same question. I'm like, I don't know where this comes from. But if you do that, it's just turtles all the way down, and it's really hard to figure out sometimes. This is pretty easy though. So when I say easy, I mean like Facebook prod engineer easy. So if it's macOS, what we're doing is we're using the etc, the Ruby library, etc, and it's statting dev console. So if we do this ourselves, actually, I don't feel like, we can do this in Ruby if you want to, but basically it stats this file, and this is actually an internals thing. So when you log into a machine, dev console has the information for the user that's actively logged in. So that's what this is doing. It's running a command, statting a file, getting the username from it, and then just giving it back to you. So It's done for you. It works at scale. It works on all different types of setups. T0, T1s, T2s, all the Macs. And it works. And if you notice here, there's also cross-platform. So there's a method for Linux. And this is an old sync. They didn't merge my PR yet. And we have one for Windows as well. So the nice thing about this is you can do node.console user, and regardless of which platform you're on, it will give you the thing.
Because Facebook is developing.
They've developed this, yes. They are your help desk.
Not you.
That's just a little bit snarky. So what we're going to do here is, that was like a little deep dive into that, or shallow dive into that, really. Yeah, so all that to say, that is included in the CP Utils cookbook. And if you look on the left here, I'm actually including this because there's a lot of like interesting things there that are useful. But if you dig into CP Utils libraries node functions, you can see all the things that you can call using node dot. So the console user is one of them. Serial is another one. We're using IOReg. And then there's also other things in here that, it's I'll be hand wavy here for a moment. There's a lot of stuff in here. We use a couple things of it. Oh, here's a really good example, actually. So you'll see this in the code. So thank you for bringing this up. This is actually super handy. In hostname, see how we have node.macOS? That is from node functions. So just like node.consoleuser is. And all that is true or false. You're like, macOS? And then if it's true, it does it. And if it's not, it doesn't. And you can do the same thing with, node.windows, if I could spell. Yep. Wait, let me fix that. Node.windows. Behold the power of Vim and bad typing. So there's node.windows, and that's just a bool. So you could also do like if node.windows, I don't know. I don't have anything polite to say, so I won't. But anyways, back to this. So we have node.console user, and this will actually give the same thing because I happen to have the username N8. And node console user, it shouldn't change my hostname, I don't believe, if I type that correctly. Let me double check. No caps, so yeah. So if I run this again, I've saved it, I've run it again. It shouldn't change the hostname because it should be getting the same name I'm logged in with. Yeah, and it didn't. It's the same thing right there. But I mean, if you want to be really evil, you could do like generate a random number and just append it to the end. I don't know what people like to name their machines. Yeah, there's all types of things you can do here. So this is like a giant rabbit hole on, yes, you can do things programmatically. So that's done. Hostname is done. We got that. What do we want? Screensaver settings, spotlight, preference panes.
How about you give us a
Really complex examples now.
something that you could say you're really proud of that maybe took a long time to develop? Something that's
Well, SSH was one of those things, but I didn't include it in this because it's kind of boring. I mean, paths is kind of a good one. You can use that to like set a default path that's system-wide, but people can always prepend that because developers are like opinionated or something about that stuff. They like to have their brew Python come before system Python and all that.
What about CP Wi-Fi?
Troll. Let's do preference panes. This is actually pretty easy to see because it pops up in the GUI. And we can do this real quick. As I've said repeatedly, I'm super lazy and I hate doing more work than I have to. So we're going to just grab these. And this is out of the README for CP preference panes. We're going to go back to PSU base. And in PSU base, recipes, default. No, don't put it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new one just for preference panes. So instead of hostname, we'll do preference panes. And just like before, we have to make a file for that. Otherwise, Chef gets very cranky. And you don't want to make any of your tools cranky, because then you're on call and everything's terrible. Preference panes. I never said I was the best typist, but all right. So we'll dump that in there. That's just straight from the example. If you like example configs, that's a fine thing to do, but we'll change this one. And helpfully, in this README, it also had a list of all the different things. So I'm going to remember this time to change it from default to actually preference panes, because that's what it is. And then we're setting the CP preference panes cookbook, option disabled preference panes, and we're giving it a list of stuff we don't want to be available to the end user in the UI. So let's go back to the README real quick. I just need to close all this stuff. Here we go. So there's a handy list here. I don't know if this is exhaustive or not. It's probably out of date. But printers are just evil, so let's disable those. Yeah, I see that's in there twice. I don't remember which repo that's on. Why don't you tell me? So we're going to go down a row, paste it in, and then edit. So this is a list rather than an actual hash. So a list uses these square braces, and it's just a list of items in quotes and then commas at the end. If you get the formatting wrong, it's not a huge deal. Chef will just yell at you. If you have a linter, that will yell at you. I don't think I do have my linter, but I can give you an example of that. Like if I miss a comma here, a lot of like Sublime Text, VS Code, a lot of these things will yell at you. Although this is not, so I don't know why. All right, so we have all these in here. We're going to disable all of them because nobody wants to look at configuration profiles, and that's set. So this is saved in preference panes. It's included in default down here. And the CP preference panes cookbook is included in CPE and knit. But that's an implementation detail, so we'll just run it and see what happens. Oh, I forgot the before. Here we go, I beat it. All right, cool. So this is what it looked like before the run. I'm afraid I can't make that any bigger. And this is what it looks like after the run. Printers are evil, they're disabled, nobody can kill trees, just give them an iPad, it's fine. There's iCloud and profiles. So the 4 things that we set to disable are no longer clickable in the UI. And we can remove one. This is the beauty of it. We have those 4 things disabled. Maybe printers aren't so bad after all, and we've made peace with them. We'll give people the ability to print back. So we're deleting it out of the list. Printers is gone. We now only have desktop iCloud configuration profiles. And we run chef. And because, oh no, I already closed it. So I closed it because if you're not using PyObjective-C, System Preferences doesn't like to refresh very well. So in fact, you can see it's still grayed out. Although it did reinstall my pretend.co pref panes profile here. And when we go back in here, I can do printers again. They're back. So in this case, the only thing you really need to know about the code is where you're putting the list of pref panes and what they are, and it handles all the rest. It actually installs a profile, which if I hadn't disabled profiles, I could show you, so let me enable that again. This generates a profile, a configuration profile on the fly, and installs it. I suggest using MDM for profiles, just hint of future things. But MDM is the best way to do it, and the Apple-supported way, most importantly. But if we go back here, you can see profiles. I have a whole bunch of other things installed because some jerks manage my machine at work. I don't know who they are. And we can actually find the preference panes profile here. And I guess I could use accessibility on this one. How do you zoom? I forget to zoom. Okay, so it's there. It's hard to see, but it says, these are the disabled preference panes, desktop and screensaver and iCloud. And because users love getting managed, they might do this. Oh no, it's gone. And then next time Chef runs, it'll say, oh no, they removed it. They weren't supposed to do that. And it ain't right. And reinstalled it. And they'll go back here, and then they'll get very angry, put in a strongly worded help desk ticket, and request that you not do this anymore. But yeah, it's back. So it'll basically just come back no matter what. And normally you run Chef on a launch statement. I don't have an example for that right now. This is kind of like, here's a zip file, go manage your machine, and try a few things out. So on this side, let's look at Ooh, screensaver, that's a contentious one. So, like most things that I do, I don't remember all this stuff because it's too much, and I'm not like a Jeopardy champion. So, I'm going to go here, copy it all, and where should I put this? Oh, I guess I should make a new one. So, screensaver, just like before, we're just going to name it something that makes sense to you. It could be whatever you want, doesn't have to be screensaver. We'll paste that on in there, and we are going to set the idle time to 3 because I hate this user. And as for password delay is going to be like 1 because I really hate them. And then we're going to run this. But as you'll see, I think I forgot a step. I did. It's not doing anything. Oh, okay. So this is an older profile, older API cookbook. This one you don't need to enable, but it's nice by default. So if there's a setting there, it's smart enough to just do it. And if there's no setting there, it's smart enough to not do anything with it. I forgot to include the recipe. So I made the recipe, but if we look at default, I'm not including it. So it's living here, it's chilling here in recipes, but nothing's calling it. So let me do that real quick. And pref. And screensaver. Screensaver matches the file. Screensaver, cool. No typos this time. So that's included. So now we'll run it. Can't even hit enter without a typo. It did the things. So now we have a new profile called pretendco.chef.screensaver. You'll notice pref panes is still being managed because I never removed that configuration. So it's still on an ongoing basis every time chef runs, checking that, making sure it's there and in the correct state. But now we added a new one called screensaver. So if we go look at screensaver settings, actually if I do nothing, I think that's really what I need to do here. Wait, I think I have a conflicting profile. Oh man, where's MCX when you need it? Okay, I don't know. Undefined behavior here. I might need to log out and log back in. But the other one is managed with the other chef, the Uber chef. And in fact, Uber chef is in the background working against me here. So if I were to manage any of the same things, it would just keep putting it back every 30 seconds. So I'm kind of strategically picking things here.
Wait, 30 seconds?
30 minutes, sorry. Yeah, it's 30 minutes plus, well, all right, well, let's take a look, right? No, not 30 seconds. That would be extra evil. I think our developers would rage quit if we did that. No, I don't want to look at that. That's a terrible lunch statement. Never mind. It's every 30 minutes plus 10 minutes display. So you more or less get, on average, like two runs an hour. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending how unlucky the display gods are. Cool. So we have screensaver, hostname, preference panes. That's all good. Screensaver's not actually working. I'll file a bug. I mean, feedback, sorry. Although, it should probably be done in MDM. I'll just say that again. Cool, so that's there. What other ones have we got? Actually, how much time? We have 22 minutes left. So let's do questions, or does someone want to see another one of these cookbooks? I'll do this guy, because you already said something. Nope. Here. I'm terrible at throwing, so let's pass it along.
All right, so I got two questions that might come with the same answer.
42?
Yeah, so the first question, like, why, I mean, what does Chef do that you can't do through other methods? Like, what justified the creation of Chef, I guess? Like,
Ooh.
it works across, I mean, I was looking online, like, the overview on the website, and it looks like it works across multiple different devices.
Yep.
Different network layers.
Mhm.
You've got a unified system to be able to manage those. So maybe that's it. And then the second question is, what's something that Chef does that's like, you know, that you would be otherwise extremely cumbersome to do without Chef?
Oh, good question. So the first one, for our answer for that is cross-platform. So I set screensaver to 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds on Windows, Linux, and Mac. I don't have to care. You know, I just set it. I can point security there, like, we would need to change this. I'm like, it's right there. Have fun. You know, so it buys me time. That hasn't happened yet, but soon. But yeah, so you can basically point people at it and enable them to make changes, simple changes, without understanding everything that happens underneath. So like a really good example of that would be, this is hard. So anybody here use the Elk stack and FileBeat or anything like that? That's one good example. That's cross-platform. What was one I was just writing? Oh yeah, OS query. So I'm writing OS query cookbook, and I'm making it so that I can deploy it across our entire fleet, and it'll do the right thing on Ubuntu, Mac, and Windows. And if I change the setting, it's global across all 3 platforms. I change it one place, it's done. So that's one thing. Secondly, it's all in text, so it can all go into a Git repo. So I won't dig on like MDM vendors too much, but in general, they have a GUI, and the peer review involves me looking over someone's shoulder and hoping they don't click the wrong thing. Whereas with this, it's absolute, it's very objective, and if someone messes up, you can git revert, go back to the old settings, everything's happy. Whereas in the UI, I don't know about everybody else here, I have terrible memory, so if I like click through some things, realize like 3 days later that it broke, how do I remember what the previous setting was? You know, that's a struggle too. But it's nice to have it. And also audit trail. So because everything's in source control, this is true of Puppet and Salt and everything else too. It's not unique to Chef. But since it's in source control, you have a solid audit trail. X person changed Y setting on Z date. And the auditors love it. You know, they love that stuff. So that's another good reason. And then the second one, something that Chef can do that's more amazing than anything else in the entire world. You know, that's a good question. I tend to be more diplomatic on this topic, but my point of view is that, yeah, this guy. My point of view is that most config management systems more or less give you the same end state, just different means of getting there. So use whatever makes sense, use whatever works for your brain. You know, this works for my brain. I like the fact that you have like one setting up here, you can override it down here. So like the default's 30. If username is N8, set it to 3 seconds, because screw that guy. And you know, you can do that for different things. And like if it's a service device, you can have a general security stance, but for service devices like a Zoom box or whatever, set screensaver to never timeout. But it's shared, and then that one gets its own special little snowflake config down here. That is something you can also do in other things, but I like the way it's done here better because it's mostly in one place, more or less.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of impressive, I guess, that you can be cross-platform and have that unified like scripting environment. Like that makes, like, I feel like if it was more popular, or I mean, I guess it probably is rather popular among, you know, larger companies, but even at like, you know, because I work at a small private college, even at my level, you know, I feel like it could be very useful. There's not a lot of people that use it, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Super useful. I didn't focus on like a lot of the Windows stuff because we are at Mac admins. But yes, it is indeed useful. I think all of January and February was nothing but Ubuntu clients for me. I did not touch macOS for like 2 months straight. But everything I wrote was cross-platform and would work on Mac. And the reason for that was I only had to do the work once, and then it was done. You know, I don't have to go write it in PowerShell over here and Bash over here and. You know, well, you could write, you know, Linux and Mac, but that'd be a pain. But yeah, so yeah, I think that's one of the things I like the most, and one of the things that Chef does, I think, exceptionally well. But we can have like a discussion about that later with these guys here. Oh, sorry, box. Whoop, go.
So, what kind of scale do you think an organization would need to have before they could benefit from something like that?
Good question. I don't know. That's really up to the organization, but I've used this as small as like 400 people or 400 machines, not people. I only know machine numbers. I don't know people numbers. So like 400 machines all the way up through tens of thousands, and it worked pretty well for all of them. It's a little bit of work on the front end normally, but once you get through that, it's like literally like a 5-second change for almost anything. Like changing the screensaver, 5-second change. It takes longer to type the git commands than it does to make the change. So if you can invest the time, it's worth it, I think. Oh, if you could toss, thanks. Box. cookbooks.
So how does the recipes in cookbooks, how are they actually delivered to the machines? And how do you ensure that your users aren't molesting them?
Dropbox. No. So the way we do it is we use the Chef server, and it syncs cookbooks down. There's also something called Chef Solo, which we're actually using Chef Solo, but you could, like, if you wanted to get super, like, fancy, you could have, like, an endpoint where the client checks in and says, here's my client cert, give me the latest cookbooks, and then download them, extract them, and just run it locally. There's lots of different ways to handle it. I know, like, I was at Wes's session yesterday in Salt. They pull it from S3. So that's something you could also do for Chef as well. I know they offered, like, hosted servers. Both AWS has that and Chef themselves. We host our own. I'd rather not, because I don't like infrastructure. I'd rather just do the thing than support all the things that do the things. And then, yeah, I think what we're looking at is kind of the solo model where you have some trusted model for pulling the cookbooks down. But that's like super into the weeds because it's different for every environment. My solution will never work for anyone else. And I'd imagine the same would be true. Yeah. So yeah, the answer is there's multiple methods, two most popular, Solo and Chef servers.
What are some resources for essentially like starting out like with Chef?
Ooh, that's a good question. So for starting out on Chef, there have been a bunch of talks over the years by Mike Dodge from Facebook, myself, and some others. And those are pretty good to like get like this type of overview. And I think for me, the thing that really worked best, and it's obviously different for everyone, but I kind of just took the example stuff and just messed with it until it made sense. And if it didn't make sense, I would go on Slack, ask questions. I think it's probably the best way to chunk through it. For me anyways, like if you're a visual learner, I know there's courses, but I am not. I am tactile, so I can't do it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions? Sweet. Good. Fine, go ahead, Wes.
Sports, that was so good.
That was a very good throw.
So you have the node objects,
Yes.
and then OHI is facts about the machine.
I didn't say Ohio ever.
Oh, okay.
But yes, Ohio are facts about the machine, right. Ohio is like your grains for salt, yeah.
So why not? What? I guess I'm wondering why the current user wouldn't be an OHI fact.
Yes.
instead of node.
Well, good question. So I think the way so what I would say about that is, so who here has their local accounts and AD accounts and they're not the same? So yeah, all right, cool. So has anybody ever changed the name of their local account versus their AD account? That never happens. But we have that issue quite a bit. So you could use console user to get the currently logged in user. We're using dep now, so when you get provisioned, your username that's local matches your AD name because of the way that we're using dep. But if they were different, you might want node person to pull something completely different. You might have like some API where you say, who is this guy? And get the information or get it from some other data source. And then you could find the actual person and then scope things properly based on that. Like a really great example of that is a lot of companies have internal IDPs and AD and all that. So you might want to look up that user's groups and then scope software to the group. And if you scope software to the group, it's nice because all then you have to do is someone wants the software, you say, go add them to this AD group, and then they magically get it. So that's a really good example of how to, why it might be a different implementation. And OHI, if it's upstream, I agree that console user should be an OHI because like the current user should be an OHI because that's never going to change like that implementation. But the way we're using it, it's a little bit funky, and the way you can use it. I know we use it differently from FB and others.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, right here.
I was just wondering if you guys would ever be interested in doing a chef versus puppet versus salt steel cage death match.
Let's do it live.
Well, let's see. If you do it in a year, it'll be MDM versus puppet versus salt versus chef. Really, let's be honest. MDM wins. Entitlements. So, sure. But I mean, I think we might have to have some like social lubrication here for that to.
Only certain members
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Good.
So with the recent licensing changes with Chef.
Yes.
What would you recommend for enterprise in terms of the future? Should we start down the road to Chef, or what do you think the future for open source will be?
The future, I don't know. I tried to stay away from So I paid attention to that. I went to ChefConf a couple weeks back, and there's a lot of talk about this stuff. But it seems like the way it's going to turn out is they'll have a Chef branded thing, and Chef's pretty insistent on holding on to their trademark or whatever it is. That legal thing about this name. And then there's going to be sync client or something like that. And that's going to be the open source version. And they're both going to be compatible. So they're going to keep this one completely in sync with Chef. The open source will be identical to Chef, just a different name. And then they're trying to figure out ways to make it so it's less painful. My plan is I'm just going to pay. I'd like to pay, but maybe not, I don't know. Maybe MDM will squash everything by then, who knows? It's the constant worry. But yeah, there's some things I'll probably still manage. Until there's an MDM profile for SSH, you're not doing it with an MDM. Until there's an MDM profile for PF, you're not doing that in MDM. So there's still gonna be a good use case for config management for the foreseeable future, I think. Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, what's the feedback mechanism to know what's going on your endpoints? How do you see what was done if I've got this deployed out to the fleet?
That's a good question. I closed the other screen. So what we do is there is Chef client, and there's this thing called Chef CTL, which was written by Facebook, and it wraps the Chef run. So basically, it runs Chef, you don't run Chef directly, and then that outputs the results from the Chef run into JSON format on disk. And then you can grab that JSON with whatever you have. But if you don't have a bunch of infrastructure for pulling data back, like Filebeat, Elk, OS Query, if you don't have anything like that, I would highly suggest getting a hosted Chef, because they handle shipping all the node data back and run data back. And you get that. It's not free, but you get it as part of the service. So the way we kind of do it is, we might pay just for the client, but we'll still use all our own stuff. Even though we're paying, but it's not appropriate for everyone. It really depends what type of infra you have. And if you don't have infra, but you have access to AWS and you don't care about paying bills, you can do it that way too. I know there's other companies that ship it direct to AWS and then use the data tools there. So it depends how you want to pay, who you want to pay, how much work you want to do. Cool. Any others? Cool. All right. Well, if that's it, I will give you back 8 minutes. Cool.